Wil is our esteemed speaker for today. Wil comes from a company called Lyte Ventures, also known as Lyte Finance, and they are building uh, a financing app for freelancers and SMEs, if I'm not wrong. So I assume loans, and I'm sure Wil can elaborate more on this as he starts. Wil has been doing this since 2019. Before that, Wil had started and ran his own software agency for over 5 years or 6 years in Singapore called the Shipyard. So excited to hear about Wil's experiences there. And interestingly, prior to that, Wil was not working as a software engineer or in tech. Wil was in the ministry, he was in the government, Ministry of Information, Communication of the Arts as a manager. Working on information policy, but maybe not directly in the coding itself. And then prior to that, Wil studied information technology and business management at SMU and Temasek Poly. Is that right, Wil?
Yep, you got it.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
Thanks so much, Wil, for being here today. Woo!
Okay, cool. Thanks,
so I think
everyone.
The format is going to be Wil's going to share a little bit about the company and the projects for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A so students can ask all the questions that you're keen on. And we'll be using the Pigeonhole link. I'm going to repost that for students as well. In case you haven't seen it yet, I'll just repost it in the Zoom chat so you can ask your questions there as Wil is chatting. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, so just for the class, feel free to interrupt me if you feel like I'm not making sense and you want to clarify things along the way. So I'm just going to share, the idea that I have is that I'm just going to share kind of my journey so far, so that you guys have a context of how of my journey, and when I share certain things, then it kind of gives you why I bear certain points of view, and then I'll go into a bit of a Lyte spiel, which is like what does Lyte does and what we kind of believe in and how we try to achieve it. And then I'll talk a little bit about the kind of challenges that we're facing or that we're trying to overcome as a business. And then we'll let the conversation go wherever it goes. Okay, so I started out I first started programming in about 2000, and then I subsequently got my Sun certified Java programmers certification, which was my first kind of professional certification in 2002, 2003, and that was back when Java was still under Sun Microsystems, and everybody was kind of like a Sun certified engineer. I was really a kid then, and you guys are not kids, but I was really a kid then. I was very proud that I could code, right? And I was very proud that my certification score was higher than some of my lecturers. But I realized that actually coding counts for nuts, right? If you don't know what to build, right? So I realized that there was so much that I didn't know. So when I left the army, I went to SMU because I felt like I needed more context into the business environment. I wanted more context into what makes a successful business. So I went to SMU, and I was very focused. I didn't actually major in entrepreneurship, but I was very focused in entrepreneurship. In terms of the majors, in terms of the subjects I was taking, I was always thinking that, hey, one day I'm going to start a business and I'm going to do programming, right? Because everybody told me that I was bad at school, right? And programming was kind of the only thing that I was good at. And then I remember the first time I started programming, my brother walked in and said, "I'll give you 2 months and you'll quit," right? And then I didn't, right? And I started to do really well in school, in poly, in the diploma I was doing. So I was really the top of the course. I was like among the top. I was always on the director's list and top 3. But even though I had the technical capability, I realized that a lot of my technical capability was not very useful because I didn't know the what problem, right? I didn't know how to solve the what problem. I could solve the how problem. I'll go more into the difference between a what problem and a how problem later. So then I went to SMU. I learned what business meant, what finance meant, what econs meant, and I have context of like, okay, this is how businesses work, and this is how the world works. And then I graduated right after Lehman Brothers went down, right? So all of us thought we were going to work in banks, and then all the banks stopped hiring, and then we had nowhere to go. So a lot of us, we thought that we will be ending up in banks. We all ended up in the civil service, or quite a few of us ended up in the civil service. it was still a kind of tech role because my first job in the civil service was a team called the Whole of Government ICT Governance, right? And it's a policy job, but it's a policy. It's talking about how does government regulate government's usage of technology, right? So then we were talking about data centers, we were talking about data center uptimes, and then service provisioning from data centers to CIOs within the civil service, right? So like each agency has their own CTO, CIO, and then they would procure central services from the government to provide IT services to their own respective agencies, and then there were the policies and the rules of which they could do that, and the central services that had to be created. And back then it was still called GCIO, which is Government CIO Office. Yeah. So then when I hit 30, girlfriend broke up with me. I was very upset, but I thought to myself, at 30 years old, if I'm not going to start a business, then I might as well not call myself or not aspire to be an entrepreneur. So I started my own software firm. And why were we a software firm? We were called the Shipyard, right? Because honestly, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what to build, right? And actually that was back in the day when there were a whole bunch of rubbish apps getting pushed up. If you remember the early days of the iPhone, right? There's a whole bunch of fart apps and and like funny sounds and lighter apps and stuff like that. It was all nonsense, right? So we didn't know really what to build, and we didn't want to solve the problem of what to build in the beginning, right? So we just decided to if you would pay me to build it for you, I would build it for you, right? And it was almost like doing a final year project for a polytechnic. So if you tell me exactly what it's supposed to do, I'll do it. And then I'll do it and I'll collect money from you. And first contract that we were supposed to have was supposed to be $25,000. And then like, oh, I'm going to write some code and collect $25,000 for like a final year project. That sounds amazing. If I can do this like 10 times, then that's a salary, right? So it was just two of us. And we just found an industrial building, one room, really like it was like a single bedroom size, and put in two IKEA tables, and we just started work that way. That was also the time when AWS was starting out, and cloud computing was not really the norm yet. Everybody was doing on-prem services. So what happened was that AWS was offering a whole bunch of free stuff. Everything on AWS was free. Training was free. Certification was free. They will pay for you. And every time you show up for an AWS event, they will give you a whole bunch of goodies like radio and torchlight and everything, because AWS had no traction. They were just simply entering into Singapore, right? Yeah, so they were just simply trying to acquire users. And so what we realized was that if I were to build something and I deploy it on AWS, I could scale and I could offer the kind of services and uptime that nobody else could for the kind of price point that I could offer it for. And simply, I was just leveraging the fact that AWS allows and cloud services allows developers like a superpower as compared to everything in the industry back then, right? So I learned AWS, and then I learned this. So I had to learn programming again, right? Because I kind of lost a lot of my programming skills when I was in the civil service. So I learned it again, and the easiest thing to learn then was PHP. So I picked up PHP. Yeah, can you imagine? Like I just learned PHP and I'm writing PHP code and charging to people $25,000 for it, right? So anyway, yeah. So anyway, that was how the firm got started. And then if you take the PHP code and you deploy it on AWS, then they patch it for you, they patch a server for you, they auto scale it for you. Network is all sorted. Domain names can even be sorted on AWS. And the best thing is that the guy is locked into your AWS account, right? So you just keep charging them. Like even if nothing is happening, they say, "Oh, do you want to renew your contract for another 2 years because you want your website or something like that, or that portal or whatever it is?" And then they just renew, and then you just renew for another 2 years, just another like $20,000, $15,000. And you just renew, especially if you landed like a big or a mid-range SME. Usually like $25,000 for tech cost. Oh yeah, whatever, and then they'll just give it to you. And because we were performing with that kind of uptime and with that kind of loads that was typical, so they had no reason to try to undercut you, right? They might try to cut you like like a couple of $100 off or $1,000 off, but generally pricing wasn't a problem. And then we kept doing this, and then finally one of the companies that we built the internal systems for, this company called Premier. This, if you know Premier, Premier is the holding company of the company that runs all the silver colored taxis. Right. So we were building the back-end systems for them. And then finally somebody on the board or in the senior management got freaked out, right? Because they were like, shit, these guys are like two guys and they are holding on to our back-end infra and our data and everything. So they basically just showed up and say, hey, I would like to figure out how like we could buy you guys, and then we have these amazing projects that you could do for us. They were thinking that it's going to save them cost if they brought it in-house, right? So that's how we effectively got acquired. It wasn't I went to several people with the acquisition deal to double check the numbers. It was not a woohoo kind of acquisition. It was like, yeah, fair kind of acquisition. So I'm not sitting on a ton of money now, but it was an okay deal. And then subsequently we were offering in-house services for Premier, and then we were building in-house apps, and then because businesses always think that software development is the same as IT work, so I ended up having to take on like learning how to run a service desk, an IT service desk, and learning how to be a CTO of sorts, right? And that was really, I was forced to do it. I totally didn't want to do it. I just wanted to be a developer, but I had to become a manager of sorts. And then we had a budget, and then I had to build a team. I cannot just be 2 or 4 programmers. I have to have like a team of 6 kind of programmers and a service desk with like 3 people, that kind of thing. Then the problem that we had, so just keep quiet about it. But I feel that one of the challenges that we had was that when IT is an in-house service that you're offering, the company tries to undercut you, and then they are like, hey, those guys shouldn't be paid so much, that kind of thing. And at some point of time, it just kind of didn't really work that well. Once again, another problem that bit us was the what problem, because a lot of people think that building an app is about the how, right? If only I had an app that looks exactly like Uber, or if only I had an app that looks exactly like Grab, suddenly I would own the market or something like that. And that totally just skips over the business problem of it, which is the what problem, which is how do you acquire users? How do you know that the features that you do are generating business value and stuff like that? So a lot of people don't actually understand that in building any application, there's always the what problem and the how problem. And if what you're learning, I checked out Rocket Academy, so please tell me if I'm wrong, right? It sounds like you guys are technicians, right? You guys are technical people, which means that you guys are specialized in the how problem.
Yeah,
right?
But we're learning how to code. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. But solving the how problem is only, I would say, maybe even the easy side of the house, because the what problem can be as hard as or even harder than the how problem. Yeah. So anyway, so I left Premier with the Shipyard kind of on a poised to be dissolved. Yeah, because we didn't dissolve it in the beginning because we had outstanding payments, and if you dissolve the company, then nobody's gonna pay you. So we kept the company running. Oh no, shit! I should better keep quiet. But yeah, we kept the company running so that we could collect upon our outstanding invoices. But basically, we kind of moved. I moved to Lyte, and then subsequently some of my previous team members that I really value and treasure, they joined with me at Lyte, and so now I have a kind of like a mini Shipyard community inside Lyte, and that's where I am today. And in Lyte today, I'm a head of tech. And then, okay, maybe I will just blab a bit about what a head of tech means or CTO means, right? I always feel that a CTO has multiple parts of the job. One is the product application, building the application, the team to build the application. And then there's always the little kind of plumbing work they need to do, which is the tech ops, DevOps, and IT service desk kind of thing. So that's roughly how the kind of work that we kind of got to juggle if you're at a CTO level. And I don't mean CTO means like better, right? Some people can be really good and they just want to be senior engineers. And I've always been pushing for senior engineers to be paid higher than managers, because actually they are that valuable. Okay, and then what does Lyte do? Okay, so for my journey so far, are there any things that you guys want to ask? If not, I'll just move into kind of what Lyte does.
Maybe we can save it for the Q&A in a bit. I
All
think
right,
students
cool.
have been putting a question. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna move over to what Lyte does. Okay, so Lyte, I think the easiest way, so Lyte is actually a group of organizations, but those are more of like legal entities. The way you can break Lyte down is into two main parts, which is Lyte Pay and Lyte Finance. They are both trying to solve the same kind of problem, but they're solving it with a different target audience in mind. So Lyte Finance really targets the SME B2B kind of business, and then Lyte Pay kind of targets the B2B to C kind of business. And what is B2B to C, right? So what Lyte Pay does is, okay, so I don't know if you guys, I'm sure there's some people here who have tried to be a real estate agent or are a real estate agent, right? So if you're a real estate agent, you would actually finish your transaction, you would sell your, like somebody asks you to sell a house and the deal is done and you're done, right? And the challenge is that you don't actually get paid until like 6 to 9 months later. Like for example, if you sold a condominium, you only get paid like 6 to 9 months later because of administration, because the developers don't pay out immediately, because the transaction doesn't actually go through, right? So at a certain point of time, your work is done, but you haven't collected upon your income, right? So what the initial product of Lyte Pay was that on a single request, that means if you are a real estate agent and you went into the system and you said, I sold this thing and I have $10,000 worth of income that is coming in 6 months' time. Can I get the income today? We can actually use that information. We go to your agency and we say, hey, this guy says he has this amount of income that's coming in the future. He wants his money now. Is that all right? And the agency verifies that, yeah, that's okay. So what we do is that we put up the cash, you pay a fee for getting your money earlier, and then you get, you basically, if you're the real estate agent, you get your money today for a fee, right? It's a fee, it's not an interest rate, and we'll never take the money back from you, right? Because when the money then becomes available, we collect it from the person who pays out. That means you collect it from your agency, which means it's not a loan, right? Which means this is the best thing to do if you have a credit card loan. You should actually advance your money, because for a flat fee, you don't pay an interest rate. You get your money today, you pay off your credit card loan, and then when your money becomes available, we will collect it on your behalf. And it's not a loan, and it doesn't affect your credit rating because it's an open draw, meaning to say we collect from the people who owes you the money and we don't collect from you. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the initial basic idea of Lyte Pay that started the whole journey. And then with that, the entrepreneur started to think, hey, how could I do this better, right? And he was saying that, hey, if as a real estate agent you have multiple pieces of property, then and you have some income coming in on, say, December, some income coming in February, some income coming in May, then technically I can give you a balance, and you, instead of making a single request to a single sale, you can request money off that portfolio of balance income that you're getting, right? Which means that because different projects have different levels of certainty and levels of risk, we can technically compute, and then we can technically give you your money, and we can give you a small amount of money, which you don't have to say, I want the whole $10,000. You could say, I only need 500, or I only need 1,000, and you can request for 1,000, and we pay you, and you pay a percentage fee, and then when you need another 1,000, you can just request for another 1,000. So we call that balance, we call it Lyte money, right? And that is one of the main products, or the mainstay of the Lyte Pay system today, which is basically doing a system that is allowing for agents to advance money that they're going to receive in the future. And then there are a whole bunch of ideas. So now I'm moving more into the future stuff, and there are some things that I have to keep under wraps because we don't want our competitors to copy exactly what we're doing. But the basic idea of the thing is the same, right? So if I can do this for real estate agents, then can I do it for other types of freelancers, right? That means for anybody who has potential income that's coming in, job already completed, how can we verify that the job is indeed completed? And if the job is indeed completed, how can we offer that money today and not offer it as a loan? Yeah, and we're MAS licensed to do this. So yeah, so that's the basic idea of Lyte for the B2B to C. And it's B2B to C because there's always a real estate agency, and then there's the agents itself, or there's usually somebody else who needs to pay out and somebody who needs to receive. Okay, so that's the basic part of Lyte Pay. Lyte Finance is more straightforward. Lyte Finance is more like a SME loan shop, right? So if you need a loan, if you're an SME and you suddenly need a certain amount of loan, then basically we can do a credit rating for you. We can figure it out whether you're eligible for the loan. This is only if you're a business, right? And then we can give you the loan probably faster than most banks can. Yeah, and that's what Lyte Finance does. So Lyte Finance is really more loans, and then Lyte Pay is a lot more like B2B2C kind of single request kind of stuff. So you can imagine the kind of IT systems that are needed to support this kind of business systems, right? Which is internal loan tracking. You kind of need the algorithms to try to figure out the data and to try to model what your pricing should be. You kind of need to calculate risk. You need different people will be trying to pump to you guys, to the organization, like different bank statements to prove that they're worth a certain amount. And then there are those problems of like, oh, how do we do data entry for this faster? Can we use OCR? Can we upload this kind of bank statements in a system, and the system can quickly calculate the credit rating and the account balances on the human's behalf. We can do pricing, we can do analytics, we can do trends. These kind of problems, that's one kind of problem. And then the other, like finance, the Lyte Pay side of problem, there's always the KYC kind of problems. Are you who you say you are? And then the other problems, which is how do we build? So I'm moving into the challenges, right? How do we build what we have built and make it usable by different countries and at different locations for different use cases with different flows, right? Because the real estate agent flow is pretty straightforward. But then what happens if you're a photographer, right, who have done a job for Redmart, but then Redmart hasn't paid you, for example, right? How would the flow of that work, right? And how do you build out a flow that makes sense? Yeah, so then for each kind of category, there are two ways of thinking about it. Can we standardize? Or if we can't standardize, then can we custom in a way that multiple teams can build multiple flows on a single platform? Yeah, so that we don't impede one another. Because so this moving more into the technical kind of problems sets that we started, right? All these started out with MVPs, right? MVPs are minimal viable products, right? So the product team was like, yeah, I don't care whether it works properly. I just want to see whether people will use it, right? And then they build up a flow that's not sustainable. There's a hamster behind the wheel. Somebody's doing it manually in the back end, right? And then suddenly you get product market fit. And then when you get product market fit, then suddenly you're like, oh shit, I got to build this properly. And then suddenly MAS requires us to be audited. There are tech audits, and we need to prove that our application is secure. And then we have to step up the tech, right? But then you're building upon this legacy thing. And can you let me just describe how terrible the problem is, right? The application was originally built on Laravel, and then there was a different head of tech that was hired, and he was trying to migrate the whole thing to .NET. So we have a Laravel front end and a .NET back end, and then they realized there was too much effort to continue the migration, so they stopped the migration project. So now everybody is building on a Laravel front end and a .NET back end, right? And can you imagine? It's like kind of crazy to try to find Laravel and .NET, like people who can build both Laravel and .NET, right? Yeah, so those are like kind of the legacy problems that we're dealing with. Then of course there's the new products, right? And then the new products, then the senior engineers and the engineers will be like, oh, can I use a different tool for the job? Which is very standard, right? Oh, I want to use Python and I want to use React, I want to use React Native and stuff like that, right? And yes, the answer is always yes, right? The answer is always yes. Please use the right tool for the right job, right? But then you need to understand what is the right tool for the right job. Because if you're going to have to interface back, then what are your interfaces, right? Are you going to use REST API interfaces, or are you going to interface over a database? Are you going to drop a file? That kind of thing. So they're kind of engineering problems, but they're not exactly coding problems, right? And that's the challenge. So that's one of the challenges of being a developer, right? A lot of times developers, and this is true of myself when I started, right? I thought that if I could code, then I'm done. But actually, what doesn't work in terms of engineering is that you're actually there to solve problems, and coding is simply a tool, right? And so what I see when I meet senior engineers is that their toolkit is huge, right? Oh, you want it in this way, this way, this way, and you want to build it on Azure, and then it needs to call AWS backend, and the answer is like, yeah, I think I did it once before, that kind of thing, right? Right. And of course, each of these very ridiculous sounding architectures are there for a particular reason. They were trying to solve a particular business problem at a certain point of time. That business problem was the biggest problem that they're trying to solve. Right. So a lot of times when I meet senior engineers, they usually like blow my mind because of the breadth of what they are able to do, and also the depth that they have in particular technologies. So you usually won't be deep in everything, but you'll be deep in some things, and then you would have very generic skill sets across a lot of things. And that's what I think a senior engineer usually looks like. And a senior engineer is super darn reliable, right? The guy is like always there to fight the fire. He's the guy whom like you would give like $100,000 to in a bank account, and he would not run away with the money, right? So that's
Okay.
yeah. Sorry.
I think I'll kind of interject a little bit. So I think
Yes,
that was great information on your background and the company. I thought that was pretty clear explanation of what the company does and some of the technical challenges that Lyte is facing. I think maybe Tanesh was suggesting that maybe before we jump into most of the Q&A questions, which are more general questions, which are great questions, but I think a bit more general, maybe we can open up the floor to the group for anyone who has questions specifically around Wil's background or the technical challenges that Will was just mentioning at Lyte.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great sharing, Will. So before we go to the Q&A with general questions, if you have anyone has questions specific to what he has to say, maybe I'll start. So you did mention about like trying to expand the Lyte Finance thing to freelancers. And I know you can't share too much because you don't want people stealing ideas, but I have friends who are freelancers, and it's not uncommon in that space to like be snubbed. Like people come back and renegotiate how much money they want to pay you.
Yep.
So it's how this is a lot more interesting than like real estate agents where they're guaranteed a 1% or 2%. So how is Lyte so like look at this problem, either from the technical aspect from it or the business side of it? How do you do risk assessment for freelancers? Yeah.
The answer is that we suck at it today, right? And that is what, if you join Lyte today, if you are on that particular team, you would be part of trying to figure out how to solve this problem, right? We have some ideas, which is if I were to ask you back the same question, how would you solve it, right? It would be like, reputation of the freelancer, reputation of the payer, right? And then if you have enough information about the freelancer and enough information about the payer, then technically at some point of time you would say, I have enough confidence. Does that make sense, right? Without giving away too much about how you're going to try to acquire all these data sets of information. Effectively it's kind of an information problem, right? And how do you figure that out? Yeah, like, and there's of course a certain amount of risk that you have to manage, I guess, because just because the guy always used to be paid on time doesn't mean that he'll pay you on time. Yeah, but the basic concept is validation, and of course information. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for answering. Pretty interesting. I think hopefully you'll hold like people paying freelancers more accountable to the initial contract. So
yeah, the challenge is that we actually don't know whether it's going to make things worse or make things better, right? Because as a freelancer, what we could solve the problem by making you get paid, right? Because we already paid out to you. right? The challenge is now then we have to collect the money, right? And we're trying to not go into the business of doing debt collection, right? So like you don't want to go to a pain where suddenly you got Singapore debt collectors showing up at the business's doorstep, right? That is totally, to us, is a fail scenario already.
But B2B less risk, right? Okay, I guess it's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah,
Maybe we don't have to go there.
I've seen defaults. Yeah, I've seen defaults in places that are really unexpected. So
okay.
Like Evergrande. Yeah. Anybody else have any more questions specific to the sharing?
I had a question. I was just curious to hear more about. You said you kind of tried to recreate your team that you had at Shipyard in Lyte Finance, and was that a priority for you? And was it difficult, or what was the motivating factor behind that?
I think what I do see in the industry is that generally if you hire a senior engineer, and the senior engineer has worked with an awesome team before, usually, I mean, it's true for almost any agency, right? Then suddenly, hey, there's a great opportunity here, and then, oh yeah, my job kind of sucks, and then people just kind of shift over. There is a certain thing that I really like about my team is that there's this culture that we have built up over time, and actually the culture is not something that is secret, but it's something that is really hard to do, and it's really like if you really could run Scrum well, right? If you really could run, Scrum, right? Do you guys teach Scrum? Right?
We do Scrum processes.
Yeah. So if you do Scrum really well and you authentically do Scrum well, and really there's a no blame culture and everybody's really trying to help each other get better, right? The culture that comes from it, right? It's really hard to achieve, and it's something that you have to keep working at it. And so if you have a team who already kind of caught the vision of what a great dev team culture should look like, where people can say, hey, why did this sprint not go well, right? And then we could say, because we couldn't do release. We couldn't do release because testing took too long, right? And then for the QA to not feel blamed, right? For everybody to know that it's everybody's responsibility to get things into production. For everybody to know that it's our job to deliver on the sprint, right? To say that yes, and why did we let QA die, right? Why is it QA was dying and nobody said, hey, is there anything I can do to help, right? Or like when there's an outage, right, we can actually have an honest retrospect to say, wait, where did we screw up, right? And to not throw people under the bus. That's, I think, hard to do. And it requires some culture shift. I think we are still doing what we call Scrum, but meaning to say there are certain parts of Scrum that we haven't managed to pull off yet. And speaking to other head of techs, I also learned that it's not so easy to just because you manage to have a multi-scaling, multi-platform application team in a certain company, when you go to a new company and you set that up again, you pretty much have to do it from scratch again. It's a bit like, the culture, and not just the culture, right? Even because the technical choices and the technical building blocks that you have built on, you can't just as a head of tech say, I want you to use all these exact toolkit that I want you to use, right? Because every engineer has their own strengths. If you do that, if you do that, you get locked out. So you want to leverage the whole team for that. And I built, or rather, there were some of my employees who started out as really junior programmers who later became Scrum Masters and later became senior engineers and even product owners. And in some sense, we love them, right? So we kind of want to work with them again. Okay, sorry, very lost of. Try again.
Does that answer your question?
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll transition a bit in the interest of time. Transition a bit to the general questions because students have democratically voted for what they want to hear about. So I think I will try and moderate and keep things interesting. Great. So Will, I know you have access to Pigeonhole, right? So I'm gonna be reading off, picking questions from there. Top voted questions so far. What kinds of engineers are you looking for and why? I think one of the big reasons why, well, one of the great things about Lyte being here today is that Lyte is actually hiring engineers, and so this can be relevant for all of us.
Yeah. So there are two kinds of engineers that generally I have my eyes peeled for. I'm not talking about front end, back end. I'm looking for senior engineers and junior engineers, right? For the more senior engineers, I'm really looking for somebody who has maybe 7 to 10 years of experience handling a certain technology, and also
Which is none of us.
yeah, which is like a lot of miscellaneous skill sets. The reason why I say it here is because that's kind of what you're building for in your career, right? You want to have a lot of miscellaneous skill sets, but certain skill sets that are very deep, right? For junior engineers, right, usually what we're looking for is a superpower, right? That means you can suck in everything, but that's okay because I know that if I give this kind of task to you, you're gonna own it, right? And you're gonna be awesome, right? So like for example, right, some of the two of the junior engineers that I hired, they are simply HTML CSS whiz, right? HTML CSS only, right? They are amazing at HTML CSS. They write the best kind of CSS code. They write the best kind of HTML code. And if you have a mockup, they can get it pixel to pixel, right? So that in itself is a superpower. And then they're like, oh wow, but you can't write logic, right? And their logic sucks, right? And that's okay because we can build off that and we can train that for you. But I know that if here's a mockup, here's 2 days, can you get me the thing pixel to pixel? The answer is yes, right? So like it's just a very simple skill set, but it's mastery of that skill set for junior engineers. Yeah. For another thing that I can catch out for junior engineers is that I like to see you mess around with your code, right? That means like you have a real world problem to solve and you just solved it, right? One of the junior engineers, and this guy had no official qualifications in programming. He wrote a little app so that he could digest like New York Times to get like little snippets of New York Times so that he could read it on a bus. Right? It's a very like unnecessary kind of app, but he just wanted to prove that he could do it to himself, right? And then he showed it, right? And then, oh, okay, that's awesome, right? So I know that he's messing around. I want on board because I know if he keeps messing around, he's going to be senior one day. He's going to be darn good at it one day. Okay.
Oh yeah. So in a sense, does that suggest that each of us should try and be specialists as an entry-level engineer?
I don't know. I think a lot of us are not so young anymore, right? We know that there's no one formula to success in life. But in terms of what I look out for is that I think maybe being deep in something shows that you're passionate about it, right? So that's what I do look out for. I don't know whether that's the answer for you in your choice, right?
Okay. Related question from Bunwee in the comments. What sort of folks are you looking for to solve the how problem? Do they need to be software engineers?
For the how problem, you need to be technical to some extent. I have one person who is not a software engineer, who is an engineer. He's a tech ops, what we call a tech ops engineer. He's basically the global administrator, managing Azure ADs and Active Directory infrastructure, Exchange servers, that kind of thing. So he's not a coder, if that's the question. Sorry, which question is this?
Oh, this is in the comment on the main question.
Oh, hang on, let me just see. Yeah, he's not a coder, but he is an engineer because he solves it by configuring servers, by configuring applications. Yeah, so that
Bunwee, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Generally, I would say if you're solving the how problem, you should have some engineering experience.
Yeah.
Related question from Xiuping. How do you learn to solve the what problem? Because we're saying what is so important, right?
Okay, so that's actually, in my view, a different career altogether, right? Because for what is and this thing has exploded. It's called product, right? If you say that, people say, oh, I'm a product person, right? So what is a product person? They always do things like user validation. The books to read are lean startup, design thinking, that kind of thing. You're doing a lot of experiments, right? You're trying to do user experiments. You're trying to do validations. You're trying to figure out what are your data sources and how do you validate something. A bit like what Tin Mays was saying, which like how do you solve the what problem of like how do I know that I can collect, my money in the future, right? So you're always like, oh, how do I like what application do I need to have? What data sources do I need to have in order to say that I can answer the question? And then you go to the technical team and the technical team, okay, I can plug you up with this data. I can plug you up with that time series data. Oh no, that time series data is not good enough, right? So yeah, so that's a product question, and it's a whole different school of training altogether.
How would we learn?
I think if you really just want to start by reading the book The Lean Startup. Yeah, that's probably the first step. I'm not a product person. I actually have a chief of product so I have the luxury of solving the how problem, right? Yeah, there are some other books that you can read. You can read. Crap, I don't have my reading list. But you can read Netflix. What's the Netflix? You can read the books about the startup stories of Netflix, of Amazon. Yeah, and you see how different people kind of solved that problem and how the companies were built. And that's really much a product journey as opposed to an engineering journey. Yeah.
Xuping, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Will. And maybe you could share your reading list with us later.
Okay, yeah, I'll
That
go
would be
dig it
great.
up.
Yeah.
I'll go.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would add on is that
I'm sure Kai has a whole bunch of product.
I would add
too.
on that I think the best way to learn this is just to build something, talk to your customers, and listen to their feedback.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that a lot of engineers don't want to talk to customers. And that is why I'm here talking to you guys, because I know a lot of engineers don't want to talk to people.
Okay. Ooh, Teresa's question is a bit complicated.
Okay.
We hold fast to integrity, empathy, and being future-proof in our strategy, design, and innovate. I assume this is on your website somewhere.
Yeah.
Integrity and future-proof are common principles, but how does empathy come into the picture?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this. I'm thinking like, should I answer this on behalf of the company or answer this on behalf of myself? Okay, I'll answer this on behalf of myself first because I think it's simply easier. You guys are mid-career and you're going into tech, right? The funny thing is that I have in the last 6 months or so, I've been doing a mid-career course on counseling psychology, right? And this is why I started to, let me just share with you guys the reason that I'm doing that, right? Is because I started to realize that whatever you build in tech, right, it's going to last you maybe like 5 years or 10 years, and then suddenly it'll be obsolete before you know it, right? And I was really pushing myself to try to figure out how do I become more anti-fragile, and how do I invest in things that are more eternal, right? And I started to realize that actually the only thing that seems to last, that will not erode as quickly as tech is actually human-to-human relationships. And so that's why I started to go into counseling and counseling psychology. And I think empathy is one of those things that are underrated. Yeah, it's really underrated. A lot of people think that they listen, but actually real listening is hard, right? Like for example, one of the things that I did learn over the past 6 months was that you want to listen to the point that you can paraphrase back the person you're listening to that person's satisfaction, not to your own satisfaction, right? And it's not just knowing that you heard the person, but knowing that the person feels that he or she is heard, right? Because there's a human need to be heard, right? And to be frank with you, while we always repeat to ourselves integrity, empathy, and future proof, right? The challenge is that we suck at it and that we are so far from really doing it well, right? And we always check ourselves like, what the heck did we just do to our customer? Why is our customer jumping through that loop? Why is that customer so frustrated that we gave the person a card that he or she didn't want, right? Because we have a Lyte card as well, right? And then the person rejected the card, and when we see that, then we are like, yeah, we fail as a business, right? But then again, the philosophy is not, or the Scrum philosophy is not that we can't fail. It's just that when we fail, we are able to stare that failure in the face, take it to pieces, and figure out how do we do better again and again, right? Yeah, so that's how I would personally perceive empathy and empathy in the business. I'm sure the founders of the business will say a different story. Yeah.
Teresa, answer your question. I thought that was great.
Yeah, but on this note on empathy, how have you personally applied it to what Lyte is doing? Like, were there any key decisions you had to make where you were forced to reflect on this empathy or lack thereof?
So the thing is that actually I feel that I kind of riffing off my previous answer, but I'm trying not to be too repetitive. Like for example, one thing that I do that maybe is slightly uncommon, but it's common for us, is like we ask you, are you happy with your salary? Right? And then if you say, no, I'm not really happy with my salary, then tell me how much that you would say that, yeah, you feel that you're fairly paid, right? And sometimes the number that comes back is like really, like, are you serious? Like, you're really thinking, right? But then after that, you start to rationalize it with them. And then you start to realize that, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense. Oh yeah, this person is actually holding on to more responsibility than I previously thought possible. And then I have to validate that, right? Yeah, and then to be frank with you, I'm someone who doesn't care about the title. But I also try to make it a point that every time I do one-on-ones, I check in with them, like, are you happy with your title? And then if you don't like your title, what should your title be, right? And even though I may not always be able to deliver on what is wanted, I once again go back to, I actually try to make sure that you are heard, that I know that you feel that you are underpaid, even though I can't pay you that amount now, right? I know that you feel that your title is not big enough, even though I can't solve that problem for you now, right? And I realized that it's simply just bringing it forward. Then actually what happens is that people start to adjust. People start to realize that, oh yeah, if I try to rationalize it, I feel I'm underpaid, but like seriously, do I really expect to get $14,000 a month doing like this only, right? Then they start to like, oh, Will, actually we can do this much more, or maybe how about we can move the journey to move in a certain way, and then we start from there. Yeah, and I guess empathy is a journey, not a destination.
Teresa, answer your question. Awesome. Okay, Mr. T, what were your guiding principles in choosing members when founding the Shipyard?
Yeah, you mentioned at the start it was just two of you, but then you mentioned at the end that you had a close team that you wanted to bring to Lyte. So did you expand your team of Shipyard? And if you did, how did you choose like who to be on your team?
In the beginning, it was really bad because I didn't know how to hire. So I was basically hiring cheap, right? So I was just trying to figure out. In the beginning, we didn't have money, so we were trying to get like for $2,000 a month, like what kind of programmer can you get? But over time, we started to have some kind of philosophy in hiring. Okay, maybe I'll try to be more specific. I think to have performed well in the shipyard, you needed to do three things. And for those who speak like Chinese, I like to say, 你要会做工、做人跟做戏. And the three things is you need to know how to do work. That means you need to be able to deliver on the items that you say you'll deliver on. You need to know how to be a human. You need to work with a team, and that your team appreciates you and socially accepts you, and you appreciate the team and you socially accept the team. And you must know how to 做戏 lah, meaning to say you must know how to showcase your work, because the challenge is that some engineers spend so much time tunneling into something, solving a problem that doesn't need to be solved, or solving a problem that nobody appreciates. And if only you know how to talk about what you have done, people appreciate it a lot better. Yeah, so if I were to say the guiding principles that we had in the back of my head, Those were roughly the things. But don't get me wrong, because I didn't say this in Mandarin to them. I have a international team, so of the folks that I brought from Shipyard, all three were female. All three are female. They are still are female. Sorry, they are all three are female, and two of them are Muslim, right? So they are not the Chinese geeks. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Dinesh, does that answer your question?
Yeah. It does.
Okay. Let me skip a little bit down in the questions. There are a couple of I think Shannon had a great question. Shannon's question: based on your experience, what do you feel is the most important attribute or skill that helps new software engineers succeed at your company?
To know how to read documentation, right? You should be able to, like, if you suddenly you have to pick up Laravel, you should be able to be comfortable to read through Laravel's documentation. I think a lot of the newer people don't read documentation.
How do you code if you can't read documentation?
I don't know.
And how would you recommend that those of us here level up in this regard?
So I think, and I don't know whether you guys went through that experience, right? In the beginning, when I started to read documentation, like 70% of the documentation didn't make sense, right? Just be okay with that. Use the parts that are usable, and then as you continue to use that framework, then you read it again, then you realize that, oh, maybe now 40% of it makes sense and 60% of it doesn't make sense, and slowly that's kind of how it works. Like, I mean, it's true. Like today, if you force me to read Python documentation, I'll be like, what? Like, that's a very natural learning process, right? Because you actually need a certain structure below in order to understand a certain abstract concept. And then only after you have accommodated that certain abstract concept, then you can build upon that abstract concept to build another abstract concept. I can tell you, for me, the challenge I have now is because I have never been with crypto. Whenever my founders or the business owners or my bosses ask me, like, what do you think about crypto, right? Because I am missing so much of the abstraction and what was the basic building blocks in the early days, I find it very hard to pick it up. But I know that if I don't give up, at some point of time, the documentation will make sense.
Interesting. Shannon, does that answer your question?
Yep, that does. Thanks, Will.
So can I quickly clarify Shannon's question? Like, it's one thing to learn Laravel, and it's another thing to learn Laravel by reading documentation. So, why would you say reading documentation specifically enables junior engineers to why is that so important? Personally, the way I learn new languages, I almost never read like the actual documentation.
That's a really good question. I think with programming and with tech, right, there's always more than one way to solve the problem, right? And engineers that I think are really good are able to solve it in like usually 1 or 2 lines, right? So like just yesterday, one of my senior engineers came to me and that he was kind of trying to figure out a lifetime session exploration problem, right? And his first question was, did someone else already solve it? And did someone already solve it and create a package for it? And then if the answer is yes, then you might as well just use it because it works, right? As opposed to like having to solve it for yourself. Not to say that he couldn't solve it for himself. It's just that did someone else already solve it? Then I don't have to deal with that. Yeah, and it's a bit like if you have the right tools, then you have more superpower. Like that's why Tony Stark is Tony Stark, right? Because he has all these tools available to him. Yeah.
I think Tanesh, what Will was referring to is be able to read the documentation if you need to, not necessarily read all the documentation up front. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But I do read all the documentation up front, right? When I picked up Laravel, I read
do?
through the whole thing once, right?
Oh wow. Okay, that's intense. Okay. Okay. Interesting.
It's not always possible with everything, though. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So I have another angle which I think could be relevant to everyone. So I had a question. Yeah. How have your experiences been leading a software agency at the Shipyard, and how has that shaped your perspective leading the tech team at Lyte? And I think this also fits into a broader question for our students, right? Thinking about where they want to go after they graduate from Rocket Academy. right? What are the pros and cons of working at a software agency versus a relatively more product company? And yeah, what is your general sense on that?
How have your experience leading a software ship? I guess it really depends on what you want to be, right? And the answer is that actually different people want to be different things, right? So if you want to be a senior engineer kind of character, you might benefit from working in a software agency. And the reason for that is because usually when you work in a software agency, you get to do a lot of random projects. What you don't want is that you don't want to work in a software agency and say that I only do this kind of technology or this kind of problem, and like having 10 years of experience with only knowing how to configure an Oracle database or something like that, and then you're like, but we don't use Oracle databases, and suddenly you might find that it's very hard to find a job. So you want to be deep and you want to be wide as well. If you work in like a product firm, I think you have a choice of continuing to be an engineer, or you have a continuing to be an engineer, or deciding to be more like an architect, or deciding to be more like a manager, right? But those options don't really exist if you're at a software agency, I feel. Because when you're at a software agency, you usually don't need an architect and you don't really need a manager. Or a manager in the sense of like a CTO kind of manager. You're usually there to solve a certain problem. It's a salesperson who sold it and you're just delivering and it's out the door. And then it's maintenance contracts, right?
So kind of short-term, or rather wider exposure at a software agency to different technologies, but at a product company, then there's a more depth in the team, so to say.
Yeah, and you can do more generic stuff or more specific stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think we're running a bit short of time. There are a few more questions, but I think I might send them to you afterward.
Okay.
Maybe just as a wrap-up question, Akira is. I think the effective technical team will covered a bit obliquely, right? That question.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Maybe as a wrap-up question, Will, would you have any general advice for our students here who are making this career switch from everything, all over, from healthcare to teaching to graphics to army to kind of really all over the place, to tech and software engineering?
General advice. I think I'm trying not to be discouraging as well, but if staring at source code is not your thing, don't be a software engineer, right? Because this job is I'm going to stare at source code from the time I log in to the time I log out, right?
And just to clear, source code, we just mean code, right?
Yeah, I mean code, right? Like you got to be okay looking at technical things, looking at IP addresses, looking at how to configure Unix servers and stuff like that. This has to be okay with you, and some people really hate it, right? Some people did a course and they find that they hate it, and that's okay. Maybe you're a product person, right? Yeah. So I think if it sucks, don't be afraid to change. And I guess that goes true for anything in life, right? If it sucks, change it. Yeah.
So that's profound. That's quite profound. All right. Thank you so much, Will. Thanks for your time today.
Okay.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for sharing.